So this is an official school committee meeting, and all of our school committee meetings are public, and this is the public forum for the building project, but because we're here, we have to open this up as a regular school committee meeting, so I'm going to call the meeting to order. Today is March 20th, Tuesday, March 20th, and this meeting is being recorded by Westwood. So I think without, oh yes, I think that's a good idea. We should, as we always start our meetings, start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So we'll turn this over to you, Emily.
Great, thank you. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. Actually see a lot of familiar faces in the room, but for those who may not know me, I'm Emily Parks. I'm the superintendent of schools. We appreciate your taking the time to be here. This is a series of community events that we're having to discuss with people where we are in this potential building project. So our plan for tonight is that I'd like to share some information with you, do kind of an overview of where we are, and then we'd love to open up the floor to people's questions. If there are questions that we can answer, we'll answer them. If there are questions that we don't have answers to yet, that's great information for us as well, to know what's on people's minds, and to get a sense of what the questions or concerns may be. So what I thought I would do is give you a sense of sort of where we are, where we've been, and what we imagine are the decision points or the next step in this process that we've been engaged in. And then I also want to share some pictures, some photographs, and to try to make sure that people are clear on sort of what our needs are right now in the school department. So, to that end, so I know I don't have to tell you that Westwood is a community that's known for its wonderful schools, and is specifically known for being a community that invests in education. Our need right now is that we have 3 of our 5 elementary buildings that are in need of modernization. So Deerfield and Hanlon, the school that we're in now, were built in the 1950s, and Sheehan was built in the 1940s. So we have aging buildings, and what that means is that many of them have original systems, HVAC, electrical, plumbing, and at this point, some of those systems are just getting to the end of their useful life. And though we have invested in our buildings, and I think we have really made a point to take good care of them and to maintain them, we're at the point where as a community, we need to decide if we're going to continue to invest in aging buildings, or if we want to explore other solutions to dealing with some of our needs. So what are we doing right now? And I want to be clear sort of what this process is and what this process is not. Right now, we just need to figure out how to address our school building needs. And I need to be clear that we haven't decided what the answer to that question is. But this is the question that we're confronted with. What should we be doing? And what we are very clear on is that doing nothing isn't really an option. So for example, this building that we're in right now, the Hanlon School, it needs a new roof. And it would be about $1 million to put a new roof on Hanlon. And that is just a reality that we're confronted with. And so we're trying to decide, do we want to invest $1 million in a new roof on a building that was built in 1953? Is that what we want to do, or is there some other solution that we need to be looking at? I do need to emphasize that the roof is safe, so no need to be looking up nervously. We inspect it frequently. We do lots of repairs. We patch the roof. But as you know, those of us who own houses know, at some point you need a new roof on a building. That's where we are. So we're trying to figure out how to address our school building needs. And part of that answer seems to be that it would make sense to get funding from the state if that were a possibility. And there is a program at the state level called the Massachusetts School Building Authority. It's a competitive grant program that provides partial reimbursement to local communities to renovate school buildings or to construct new school buildings. And so we want to make sure that we explore that process fully. Westwood has a history of engaging in that process to get state funding for its school buildings. So we received significant state funding in the past. It's how we got what we still refer to as the new high school, but it was actually opened in 2005 now. So this is how we funded construction of our high school and Martha Jones and also Downey, both of which underwent full renovations in about 2002. So they were partially funded by this state school building program. And so what we did as a school department is last spring, we entered into this process with MSBA, and we submitted what's called a statement of interest. And the statement of interest is a way to explore if we can get into this funding program with the state. The state process requires that you submit an application for only one building. And so we submitted for Hanlon because it was our assessment that Hanlon would sort of position us the best in terms of getting invited into this process with the state. So we have been invited into what they call their eligibility phase for the Hanlon school. Now, as part of that conversation with the state, we were clear that we have needs beyond the Hanlon school, and we think that it's possible that whatever proposed solution the community ultimately decided on would involve more than just the Hanlon school. And having been invited into the eligibility process, it is possible to expand that conversation with the state beyond Hanlon. But we were really excited to get this news. I guess it was in December that we got invited in because it is a competitive program. And each year, it's only about 10 to 15% of the communities that apply that get invited in. And in fact, many communities apply again and again and again in an effort to get invited in. And we, in fact, were invited in on our first application. So that's a really exciting opportunity for us as a community. So where we are now is that we would need to take the next step with the state this spring if we want to continue towards getting this state funding. So we are invited into eligibility, and partly what's happening during this eligibility phase is the state is assessing our sort of will as a community to go forward in order to get this, this funding. Some of you may remember that a couple of years ago we were talking about elementary buildings. And so I want to say out loud that we went through a process a couple of years ago, and what we did this year is we hit the reset button. And that was because we realized that though we did some work to think about possible solutions for our building needs, that we realized that that we needed to kind of come at it from a different angle. I think we made some missteps in retrospect. And we realized that we needed to do a better job engaging the community in the decision-making process. So as much as we thought we were talking to each other at meetings, there was a moment where we realized that the word hadn't gotten out beyond the school committee meetings. And so we reflected on that and realized that we need to engage the community in a different way, which is why we're approaching this in such a different fashion this year. And we also realized that we really wanted to work with the MSBA to potentially get tens of millions of dollars in state funding. And in conversations with the MSBA, it's clear that you have to work within their prescribed process in order to be eligible for that funding. And MSBA has been very clear with us, don't get out ahead of them, that in terms of any decision-making about the scope of a project that might go forward, that they would have to be part of that conversation as well. So they don't want to work with a community that brings a solution to them. They have a lot of experience in this realm, and they want to be part of that conversation with the community. So I want to talk a little bit about what the MSBA process is, and then I'm going to show you some pictures of our school. So as I mentioned, we recently took this initial step towards receiving these grants from MSBA. And reimbursement from MSBA, if a project were ultimately to go forward, would be about a third of the total building cost. So that's very significant, obviously, if you can get a third of a construction project paid for. Some people may remember that back when the high school was built, we got 59% reimbursement, which was really great. It's a different program now, and the days of 59% reimbursement are gone. But the reimbursement now starts at 31%, and then there are certain incentive points. You can get bonus points for certain things and get that percentage up potentially a little bit. The MSBA, as I said, has voted to invite Westwood into its eligibility period. That period is 9 months in duration. Our eligibility period actually doesn't start until June 1st. So we would be in this eligibility phase through next February. During the eligibility period, one of the deliverables that the MSBA asks of us is that the community is asked to approve borrowing to undertake the next phase of the process, which is called the feasibility study. So by the end of the eligibility phase, in order to move on, then we would have to approve borrowing for that feasibility study. If funding is secured for the feasibility study, then we have this opportunity to engage in this very broad process of identifying all the possible solutions to our building needs, and then ultimately as a community whittling down from those options to our preferred project to say, and now we think this is the one that we are interested in going forward with. And that obviously would be dependent on what the community decides its values, what our educational vision is, what we think we can afford. All of those things would come into play during the feasibility stage. That feasibility study is typically about 30 months. So it would be a long process and a lot of conversations to figure out what we want that project to look like. So this is kind of where we are at this point. We're in the eligibility and we're trying to figure out if we are moving forward into the feasibility study. If for some reason we didn't move forward into the feasibility study, we would effectively be leaving the money on the table with MSBA and saying, no thanks. So what are our needs? So we have 3 buildings that we're looking at. So the Deerfield School, which was built in 1953. It was originally designed to be a bomb shelter. Just a fun fact about the Deerfield School. It had a modular addition put on in 1995, and it's about 35,000 square feet. The modular addition in 1995 was intended to alleviate some space needs at the time. It wasn't intended to be permanent, but I think now that it's 2018, we've accepted the fact that probably is a permanent solution for classrooms at the Deerfield School. The Paul Hanlon School that we're in right now was built in 1951. Hanlon also has modular classrooms on it, so we put on a 3-room modular addition in 2004. It's about the same size as Deerfield, a little smaller, slightly less than 35,000 square feet. And the Hanlon School actually sits on about 36 acres of school department land. And then the William Sheehan School, it's the oldest and largest of the town's elementary schools. It was built in 1948. The so-called new wing of the Sheehan School was built in the 60s and brought the total square footage to 50,000 square feet. It sits on about 4¼ acres of land. As part of this community engagement process, a couple weeks ago, the first weekend in March, we opened up these 3 schools to the community. We did open houses with building tours so that people could kind of get a firsthand look. And you know, I've called this slide "We're All Learning." That I think that experience was a helpful experience for people who were able to get a look at some of our buildings. think a lot of people in town have the experience maybe of, coming as far as the gym in Hanlon for youth basketball or something, but haven't really been out into other parts of the building. So we wanted to give people a look into the nooks and crannies. But it also was a good learning experience because it gave some of us an opportunity to really talk with people one-to-one about, what their impression was of the building, what questions they had. So I think we're all kind of learning from this process. And one of the things that I'm learning is that different people, different ideas kind of resonate with different people differently. And I want to share some of the things that we talked about during the tours. So as I mentioned, while we continue to care for and maintain these critical building systems like HVAC and plumbing, they are in fact old at this point and approaching the end of their useful life. We have some issues with air quality and temperature problems, for example. In this gym, the heat is kind of on or off, right? There's not really an opportunity to adjust the temperature. That's true in a lot of our classrooms. And that can present some challenges in terms of kids learning. I have an example up here, Hanlon. You get a glimpse of what we're dealing with the plumbing. So some of our pipes are just deteriorating, and you can see where we've patched them up. Right? We kind of keep spare parts around. The last time we tried to do some major plumbing work at Hanlon, when we went out to bid, nobody would bid on it because the system is just really old at this point. We have a lot of windows that don't open, like at Sheehan here. So just some challenges in that regard. Some of the challenges just have to do with the way that buildings were designed in a particular time. So some of you may recognize that this is the hallway leading to the main office at the Sheehan School. And one of the things that the MSBA folks commented on when they came to take a look at our buildings is that that our older elementary buildings don't have sight lines from the main office to the main entrance. And that isn't really the way that buildings are built anymore. So the entrance to the Sheehan is actually, this is the main office, it's down the hall through these doors and down a set of stairs onto a landing. And when someone enters the main door of the Sheehan, they're literally just in a hallway on a landing, and they can go down to classrooms or they can go up to classrooms. And it's not always possible to know where a person has gone after they entered the building. So that isn't the way we would design a building anymore. Similarly at Hanlon, your main office is down here, and people can enter. We do have a mirror in the hall so that we can see if the person hangs a right and goes into some other part of the building instead of proceeding to the office. So some of those challenges exist. We're dealing with some challenges around classroom sizes. So again, there are just differences in the way that buildings were built in the 50s for the kind of teaching and learning that was happening as compared to today. There are some industry standards for elementary classrooms. And so if you're building, for instance, with the MSBA, we would abide in the design process by these standards. Elementary classrooms grades 1 to 6 today range from 950 square feet to 1,300 square feet. Kindergarten rooms tend to be bigger. That just reflects the kind of play and activities that are happening in kindergarten rooms. And our classrooms, they're just small. So the majority of Hanlon's classrooms are 895 square feet. The kindergarten classrooms are very small as compared to that standard. At the Sheehan, about 90% of our classrooms are undersized as compared to that standard. And so that just presents a challenge in terms of some of the kinds of teaching and learning that we're doing today that's student-centered and inquiry-based. And when you're in a classroom that's maybe 700 square feet, when it's time to do the hands-on science lesson, there's kind of nowhere to spread out and to get out the equipment and to do that kind of work. This, for example, is one of the classrooms that's up on the 3rd floor at Sheehan. I think this is a 4th grade classroom without any bodies in it. And the other thing that you notice here is that modern classrooms tend to have cabinets and places to store all those kinds of hands-on materials, and some of our older buildings aren't built that way. So if you're in some of the classrooms, even in Hanlon, you'll see that everything is neat and orderly and in its place, but you're just surrounded by a lot of stuff everywhere. And then then we have challenges with some of the kinds of specialty spaces. So this, for example, is an art classroom. It's the art classroom at the Deerfield School. It originally was a locker room, so it wasn't built to be a learning space. And you're actually looking at the entire room right there. So I don't know if you can get a sense of how small that is. And we're looking down because you have to descend a set of stairs to get into the art classroom. It's another challenge we have, that our buildings aren't ADA compliant. And I would just compare that to, here's an example of an elementary school that was built recently in Burlington. And this is what the art room looks like there. You could see the difference in that kind of space. You can see, for instance, all the sinks and what we don't have in some of our schools. Similarly, this is the library at the Deerfield School. It wasn't intended to be a library. It was originally supposed to be a classroom, and we have converted it into a library. And so it's very small, and you'll see that the stacks are built up, which isn't the way you build an elementary library, right? You want kids to be able to reach the books and see the books, but in order to fit the collection in, we've built up. And it also presents challenges in terms of what modern school libraries are doing. So they tend to be research spaces with technology. They tend to be, we're exploring things like maker spaces, which is one of the reasons that you see kind of all of these boxes and equipment here, is that the librarian at Deerfield, actually in all of our elementary libraries, are still trying to do these kinds of educational things, even though the space doesn't really match the function. As a contrast, here's a school, an elementary school that was recently built in Andover, and that's what the elementary school library looks like. Same school, just to get a sense of what the corridors look like. School buildings that were built in the 40s and 50s were built at a time that special education wasn't really a thing that schools were. It was not literally a thing that schools were doing. And the model of teaching and learning didn't involve kids working in small groups and pull-out with literacy specialists, math specialists like we do today. And so our buildings don't have that kind of space to be working with smaller groups of students. So in all three of these elementary buildings, you see setups like this. This is up on the 3rd floor of the Sheehan School. It's the hallway. And so you see a table where we might have specialists working with a small group of kids. You also get a sense of storage. So these two things here are carts where we're storing our Chromebooks. But we don't have room to store that technology in the classroom, and so it gets stored in the hall. Right, you can't see it, but there's a door right here to a student bathroom on the 3rd floor of the Sheehan. We don't have hot water, so there's hot water in the sinks here. This is the hallway of the Deerfield School, so you get the idea also here where we have these breakout spaces happening in the hallway. This is actually right across the hall in the Hanlon School. So we have lots of people who provide services now and need office space and also places to meet with kids. So this is looking in the doorway. You can literally see the door right through this window here next to the map. And when you walk into that door, you're in a very small space that's for a speech and language pathologist. It's her office, and it's also where she would meet with kids. But then if you go through that office, there's another door, and that goes into the school psychologist's office, where she also has her office and meets with kids. And so we've done a lot of this in our buildings, of sort of carving smaller spaces out of other spaces, which it's not great space, but in addition, it poses some problems just in terms of confidentiality. There's no way to get to the psychologist's office without going through somebody else's office in this case. We have white noise machines set up in there so that when they're on the phone with parents or community providers, we can provide some sense of confidentiality. This is in the basement of the Sheehan School, so it's the teacher workspace where you see printers and copiers and paper cutters and whatnot. But it's an example of how we're also looking for places to store things, because we've taken a lot of our storage closets and we've made them into office spaces. And we also have set up space here so that we can pull out groups. This is where math specialists meet with kids at the Sheehan School. So we have these needs, and really we're in the process right now of trying to figure out how we can make fiscally responsible decisions to transform our buildings into modern places of learning where we're able to really realize the kind of educational vision that we have for our kids in Westwood. And so that we can make sure that we're addressing some of the system needs, and also to think about things like how do we make our buildings ADA compliant, right? We want to make sure that we can serve all of our students well in our buildings. So the next step, as I said, is to determine if we're moving forward in pursuit of this state funding. And the next step would be that at this town meeting, the school committee has a warrant article to authorize borrowing an amount not to exceed $1.7 million, which would be to fund the feasibility study, that 30-month process, where we would then contract with an owner's project manager, where we would engage with an architect. We would have all of those community conversations to say, what is it that we want, to develop our criteria of what's important to us, what would fulfill sort of our dreams of what we would want a 50-year investment in our elementary buildings to look like, to examine those options, to decide which one makes the most sense in terms of value, in terms of what we can afford, to whittle it down, and ultimately by the end of the feasibility study to have agreed upon a preferred option and have an architect produce a schematic design for that. And then at that point, there would be another decision point for the community to decide, all right, and are we actually going to fund that building project and move forward with it? So the feasibility study is the process to do all of those things. Think about how we might address our school needs, decide our preferred solution, and to get the MSBA to work with us to provide that funding. As I mentioned earlier, Westwood has had successful projects with the MSBA before. The state provided reimbursement that was really important for 3 other projects for us. If the project ultimately goes forward, then this money for the feasibility study would then be subject to that reimbursement from MSBA. So the cost of the feasibility study would get rolled in to the cost of any construction project that we went forward with, and we would be eligible for the reimbursement at that 30-some% rate for the feasibility study. The borrowing for this phase would be paid for as part of the town's overall debt service. So I want to be clear that we're not talking about overrides at this point. It would not impact the school department budget. It's something that the town would manage as they manage the overall debt. If we were to go forward, just to give people a sense of timeline, it would be, probably 6 years to even longer than that, maybe 10 years before anything would, a renovated building would be open or a new building would be open. So that's the kind of timeline we're looking at here. And, that presents some interesting challenges, I think, for any community, because when we have a conversation like this, ultimately we're really talking about stewardship, right? So there may be people whose kids are in 3rd grade right now. They won't get to go to the new building, right? It's going to be a longer time period than that. The good news is the kids who are in 3rd grade now get to go to a wonderful high school that somebody else took care of a number of years ago. So we really have to think as a community about, what the long-term investment is in our schools. And, the process for deciding as a community what the project will be is still at least a year away. And I need to be clear on that because I know that there's a sense, I think because of the conversation we had a couple of years ago, that some decision has already been made. And I hear terms like super Hanlon thrown around or mega schools and things like that. And I want to reassure people to the extent that I am able that we really have not made any kinds of decision, and that there is a genuine desire to have the community be part of that process. And frankly, it's too early to even talk about that yet. The first hurdle is to think about, can we fund the feasibility study? And that's when we start having all of those kinds of conversations. So right now, the only question is whether or not to go forward with the feasibility process. That's the vote at town meeting this spring. And I'm preaching to the choir for everybody who's here tonight, but if people want to stay informed, we have set up a website exclusively about everything related to the school building project. The Westwood Media Center is filming this tonight, and we'll have this forum up on a link to that video up on our webpage. And we have really committed to making sure that we communicate. You've got a letter from us, we're having forums, we're trying to publish articles in the paper and the newsletter and use social media. And I've kind of been saying my goal is to have people like roll their eyes when they see me coming. They're so tired of hearing me talk about the building project. That is my goal at this point. So that is it.
That's great.
That is the overview.
Thank you, Emily. You know, I want to thank you all for coming out here tonight, too. Because as Emily said, what we say tonight, we're preaching to the choir. It's evident by the fact that you're here and taking this time out that you care very much about the schools and about your town. So we all, I think on behalf of the whole school committee, I want to thank you for being here tonight. And what I'd like to do is open up the floor and give you the opportunity to ask questions or make comments. And we're really thrilled that you're here because this is the beginning of a very exciting process. And I think the point that Emily made about the high school, it really should resonate with all of us, that many of us weren't even here in the town yet, and we are benefiting from a truly great building. So it's on us now to provide a legacy, or to leave a legacy to kids of the future for Westwood, and to be able to continue this educational excellence that we're so proud of in this town. So without further comment, I want to open it up to you all. What's on your mind? Yes. And could you please introduce yourself and give your street address? We'd appreciate that.
Hi, Diane McCarthy, 249 Dover Road.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, we do. You can be filled on here.
Diane McCarthy, 249 Dover Road. So I mentioned this to Toby, but we received at the house the warrant articles from FinCom, and in that, the vote for the school is referenced, and it's referred to as the Hanlon School project, and talks about this project and funding this project. And I think, now I understand why, because you've explained the Hanlon School initially, but I think that undermines your message that no decision has yet been made. So I think thinking about the messaging is important, not just from you, but from other elements of the town.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I think that's a great point, and we need to do a good job communicating about that leading up to town meeting. The language of the warrant article is prescribed by MSBA, so it's literally what it has to say for this process. And as I mentioned, their process is you apply for one school, you get into the eligibility phase, and then you can open up that conversation. And we were very clear in our statement of interest that we are interested in talking about not just the Hanlon School, but looking at this project in a more holistic way, and they have acknowledged that and understand that, and I think, yeah, but that is confusing because it's the prescribed language.
So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah.
That's a great point. Other people? Other comments, questions, concerns? Yes, sir.
Jim Gileo, 737 J Street, right across the street here. My wife and I were PTO co-presidents of the Pine Hill School, and so we have a lot of my kids went through the schools here, and I taught in Westwood for 25 years. It's pretty hard to project your needs when kids haven't been born yet, because that's what you're dealing with. So how do you project those kinds of needs? I know we just got through with a big bubble at the high school, or it's at the end of the bubble, it's going down. We've got apartments being built all over the place. Any thoughts about what's going on with that? This doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, that absolutely is a challenge, and no doubt there is something that's cyclical about school enrollment, right? We kind of see enrollment go up and down, and it depends on a lot of factors. So one of the things that happens in the feasibility study is that you hire people who have an expertise in understanding things about demographics and all those kinds of issues to do a study and to do projections about what they believe is going to happen. So I'll give an example from the high school building project. So, the high school, when I got to the high school, so that was like the early 90s when I got to to the high school, there were 450 kids in the high school, and the enrollment was going up and up and up. And by the time that we were talking about the building project, we were probably at about 500-600 kids. And one of the things that happened as part of the process of studying what project we wanted to do and ultimately deciding what to go forward with is that there were projections that said we need to build for 1,000, that there was a sense that the enrollment would get to about 1,000 and that that's what we needed to build for. And so that's what we did. And we're now at 1,021 students, and it's projected to go up to 1,047, I think, in the next 2 years, and then it's going to start to decline again. So pretty good in terms of understanding what the long-term needs were going to be. And so that's the kind of thing that we would have to undertake. And I'll be honest that, you know, looking back 20 years, we didn't foresee everything that we would need educationally. So some of our special ed programs have changed since 20 years ago, and we've had to use space differently at the high school than what we imagined 20 years ago. And so it's imperfect, but certainly, you know, there are people who are very expert at thinking about those kinds of things, and that's partly what we would be getting for our money in the feasibility study.
Hi, I'm Peter Schuler. I live across the street at 779 Gay Street. My daughter went to school here, but she's long gone, and I do see clearly from your pictures alone the challenges that you obviously face with the schools. And I really haven't been paying attention to those kinds of issues, but I can certainly see the difficulties that the teachers face and the children face, and so it seems clear that that you do need to address it. So I thank you for bringing the community here to address the concerns and needs. In the specific question is, does if we go into the eligibility phase, and would you be able to propose renovations at 3 different schools or 3 new construction sites? Or do you have to stick with one project that could later be expanded? I'm just trying to understand if going through this limits us to one construction project.
No. So, yeah, so it might be, for example, that we decided we want to keep our current elementary configuration with 5 different buildings, and we're going to renovate them or maybe do additions, or right. All of those options potentially can be explored during the feasibility study. And so you're looking at, I mean, obviously it's the cost benefit analysis, right? So thinking about what you're looking for in terms of space and education, and then looking at how much it would cost, and thinking about what's important to the community, and weighing all those factors and trying to decide what the best possible solution is.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes.
Christina Martin, 23 Deerfield Road. So you were saying part of the process is after the feasibility, if we come to an agreed upon design, then the town will vote to decide if we want to go forward with that design. How would we, and maybe I'm putting the cart before the horse, but how would we agree upon the design? Would that be another vote in a town meeting? Is that based on, is that a decision the school committee makes as elected officials? How does that happen?
Ultimately, the decision, we as a school committee are looking for input, we'll be looking for input during that stage, but ultimately the decision, we as a school committee will be working with Emily and Heath and the administration to determine. After we have heard from the town, we have to make that determination as to what the best possible solution would be.
Part of that process through MSBA is to have a school building committee, and the MSBA has different roles, for lack of a better word, that comprise the people on the committee. So for example, a member of the town's permanent building committee has to serve on the school building committee. One of the selectmen, I think, has to serve on the school building committee. So there is sort of an official process for that kind of input in addition to this kind of thing. But the school committee would decide. Where town meeting comes in, of course, is that it would take a vote of town meeting to decide to fund it.
But it would also be a referendum question, too.
Yes, that's what I
Yes,
mean.
absolutely.
That's where the
At the end of the day, the town has to vote, yay or nay, are we going to go for the project? But we're hopeful that by going through this process, we'll understand what the town's needs and wants are, and we'll do our best to, and we have to, as Emily indicated, it's a cost-benefit analysis too. We have to look at cost. I mean, right now, we're hearing a lot about emotional, some emotional concerns, some, there are a lot of connections to neighborhood schools, and some are saying, wow, it would be great to just keep all 5, or maybe go to 3 or 4. People have various priorities, but at the end of the day, too, we have to be able to afford whatever it is we decide to do, so we have to keep that in mind as well. But all of these factors, that's why we have you here tonight, and that's why we'll have many more opportunities to speak with citizens of the town, so that our decision is ultimately your decision too.
And then, are we only eligible for the 1/3 reimbursement on the money that we've committed to the feasibility study if we go through to the final stage and actually build something?
yes,
Okay.
right.
Okay, thank you. Other questions?
Side of the room.
I'm Karen Albers, 105 Edgewood. I just had a question because I was at a lot of those meetings, I think it was 2 years ago, about the potential school buildings. And I thought we kind of went through some of this process already with hiring architects and doing planning and paying for all of that. Is any of that going to be in this feasibility study? So we're not paying for it again, I was just curious.
Yeah, we hope so. So we did a lot of work. We did what was called a master planning study, like to look at our capital needs and our space needs. So first of all, that work got submitted with our statement of interest to MSBA, so it positioned us really well, I think, in terms of getting invited into the process. But yes, certainly a lot of the assessment that the architects did when they went through all of our buildings and kind of took a look at what they were, it's only a couple years old, so that's still good. And so for that reason, we're very hopeful that we're going to be able to keep the cost of the feasibility study down. So remember I said that the warrant article is to borrow an amount not to exceed 1.75 million. We think that that's a really conservative number. We hope that in fact we will have to borrow much less than that because we can use some of that work that was done before. And also I should mention, in arriving at that number, we worked with MSBA. We looked at comps of some communities that have been through a similar process. We contacted the architect that we worked with through that study before. And for all the different components of the feasibility study, they gave us ranges. We added up like the outer limit of the range for each one of those categories to come up with this 1.75 million. So, and you don't go out and borrow the whole thing up front, right? You kind of pay for it as you go. So we very much hope that it won't cost nearly that much.
But what we paid, what we spent last time was really.
Oh, much less
small.
than, like way less
Yeah.
than that.
When we
How much did we spend?
For the master plan?
The last
it's
year.
about 150.
Yeah, so I mean, how much?
150,000.
Yeah.
That included engineers and architects going through all the buildings, top to bottom, coming up with the master plan. As well as enrollment, as well as,
But I would imagine, since we're talking about a much bigger number, that what the scope of what they're going to do is much broader, right?
Yeah.
But that bigger number also includes design.
Right,
You know,
right.
you end up with
Environmental
a-
studies,
Right.
site
But
studies.
even the portion of the budget that would be allocated to like whatever they did before is still going to be a lot broader than what they did last time.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
But they'll be able to build on what we already
Sure.
did. Yeah.
And then I just had a question about that presentation that you're showing tonight. Is that something that's going to be online on that website?
Yes.
I just mentioned it, is they had from that last time, I think some people are kind of gun shy about the potential because they do have in their head that it's the Hanlon mega school and what happened last time. So I think people are nervous, even if that's not true, of what's going to happen.
Right. And so here's what we need too from all of you, now that you've seen it, every group that we speak to, we depend on you to spread the word. This is a small town, and you know word spreads fast about, sometimes that's unfortunate, but we're hoping that you talk to your neighbors and family and friends and let them know that you were here and what you heard, and steer them to, tell them to open the letters and go to the website and look at the paper and listen for, the meeting dates and attend the meetings. We're hopeful that people will do that, but we really rely on you all, the choir, again, to help us in this process. So, thanks.
And if you have any questions,
Yes.
please direct them to us.
Milda Jasafa.
Hi, Mike Martell, 46 Croft Regis. First of all, Emily, great job in the presentation. Really very clear and helpful. I guess my question has to do with the 6 to 10 years. Kind of curious, when you think about the amount of maintenance that the schools are going to need between now and then, does this project kind of change the way you think about maintenance? Do we go into some kind of a bare minimum mode over that time period to kind of try to save some money?
Yeah, well, I'm going to have Keith answer that because we are thinking about those issues for sure.
Well, yeah, and we're kind of in that mode with the 3 older buildings as it is, and that's why we're holding the roof off. So we've the roof probably needed to be replaced a couple of years ago, but we're still maintaining it, we're flashing it, we have it inspected every year. So we're going to maintain the building safely and, as best as we can, make sure it's clean and safe for the kids. Are we going to do any major renovations to these buildings? Probably not, because they're up in the air right now until we make that decision. That wouldn't be fiscally responsible. So, yeah, like this back door here. Instead of replacing that, that's on our capital plan for potential replacement. But we had the contractor come in, and actually they found a way to fix it. So they're going to fix it, and we're going to maintain that. Now, if it should happen to just all out break down, then we'll replace it.
It's a smart, practical way to do it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Maggie Coppins, 98 High Rock Lane. Kind of similarly to the question that was just asked, would this feasibility study address what would become of buildings if they maybe were no longer used as schools? Is that something that you would handle, or do we just kind of end up with sort of school carcasses, so to speak, throughout the town?
Empty building.
I know that there's so many needs for the rec department and early childhood council, et cetera. Is that something that plays into this, or is that outside the realm of what you're looking at?
Yeah, I think that has to be part of the conversation. It's part of the reason that we're working so collaboratively right now with the municipal side. So there's a townwide building committee that has been meeting and that the school department is a part of. That's kind of keeping its eyes on all of the building needs. And one of the things that committee has decided is that because the school department was invited into the MSBA process, that it would sort of hold off on other building needs in town and move the schools to the top of the priority list. And I think it has, it's partly obviously because if you have an opportunity to get tens of millions of dollars, you should take it, right? And so it got moved to the top of the priority list. But it's also related to your question. So the solutions to some of the town space needs may be related to what happens with the school. So just for example, this is totally hypothetical, right? Nothing's been decided, but just hypothetically, the Deerfield School has a very interesting location in town with those beautiful fields. It's connected. It's adjacent to the town center, right, into the public library. That could be an interesting property for the town, for something. And so we would want that to be part of a big community conversation.
Okay, thank you. Did I see a hand over there? Tony, you're doing a bang-up job.
Thank you. It's my exercise for the day. Hi, I'm Christine Turley, and I'm on 43 Glen Road. Thank you for the communication. It's nice to actually get this advanced notice about what's going on rather than finding myself at town hall or town meeting and voting on something. So I do applaud you for that. My question reverts back to the actual voting process, because frequently that's, I think, where people actually get involved, unfortunately. When that, as the voting process goes on to approve this money, or not approve it, but when we're at town meeting and voting for this, the funding of it, will we know, say that there are going to be 3 buildings that are renovated?
Are you talking specifically about this?
So not this
coming up?
spring,
You're not talking about this
Not
spring?
spring, because I find that things, once they get rolling, they kind of go. Once people say, yes, take the money, we approve it, let's get involved in this, it really keeps going. So I am thinking of down the line, are people going to find themselves? You said that the school committee has the ultimate decision on, they have to make an ultimate decision. Is that on actually what the final outcome will be? In other words, will we say, sure, here's, X amount of millions of dollars, and then find that, well, because it's more cost efficient, we're going to get one school out of it?
No, so I'm glad you asked that question. So no, the process would be first to go through this big process and decide what the preferred option is. The school committee votes, this is what we're recommending go forward, right? And that would have to happen first, because then that's how you determine what the cost of the project's going to be going forward. And that's also the point at which you're really getting down to the nitty gritty with MSBA about reimbursement rates and things like that. And so the vote for the funding would be for funding for a particular project.
Okay.
Very
Yeah.
specific.
That would be the second vote.
The second vote. We're talking like 3 years from now,
Right.
or something
Okay.
in the name.
So to be like with the library and the high school, and I've been through it all, and totally support that. My senior will graduate this year, my last senior, and I think the schools are so important to everybody in this town. But you might have, it'll be at the phase where you have models actually, and we can use it.
We would have,
They'll say yes, we approve money
Plans.
for that.
Yeah, it'll be designed.
As we
Thank
did
you.
for the high school.
Thank you.
Yes,
Right.
okay.
Same thing.
I haven't rolled into one, but I know the library better, but. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or thoughts? We gonna have storm tomorrow? What's that?
full day of school tomorrow. Right here. Thursday.
All right, well, if there are no further questions or comments, anyone on the school committee want to say anything or add anything?
You have the mic.
Mr. Microphone? You're going to drop the mic? Drop the mic.
Oh,
Uh, Oh,
Christina Martin from Deerfield. I think it might be beneficial for some people in town to see, like, Carol, you mentioned some people have an emotional attachment, some people in community neighborhoods, community schools. I think there's other reasons besides people just being emotional.
Oh,
There's
absolutely.
benefits, health benefits, safety benefits. I feel like it might be helpful for people to see sort of those things listed out so that they know the school committee and the district understand these things that the community values so greatly, but then to also see the many benefits that the range of options potentially could provide, whether they are newly renovated schools or schools with additions or schools that are somehow brought together, whatever that may be, just so that, like, one, people understand, like, they have heard these things that we're saying over and over again, but that also they can see, like, okay, yes, I see this list of benefits here, but when I look at the benefits of new construction, like, I can see it's this really big chunk, and so much of it deals with academics or providing for, my kid with special needs or whatever it may be.
right,
To help
that's
them
a
know
great
that
point. I know what
also
you're saying, and I
understand.
didn't mean to. That was just one example I was giving, and you gave many other great examples about environmental concerns, safety concerns, accessibility concerns, all kinds of factors, all kinds of points that people will bring up. And I think that certainly would be part of the process.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question for me, Christina, because I think I wholeheartedly agree that that has to be part of the conversation, is like, at what point in the process do we start getting into that piece of the conversation? And what I'm hoping is the takeaway message from tonight is there's only one thing on the table right now, and that's to decide if we even want to have that conversation. And the way we get to that conversation is to say, yes, let's do this feasibility study. You know, it's clear that we need to do something, and it, to me, is clear that getting a boatload of money from the state would be a really great thing, right? And so the way that we get to that conversation is to vote to fund the feasibility study. And then we've got like 2 years
To take on to all of those considerations.
And hopefully the whole town to come together behind one project.
Coalesce.
From all the different school districts.
So really the essence of the April vote is, do we need to do something about the schools?
May, but yes,
May,
exactly.
sorry.
That is exactly it. Like, are people on board that we do, that this is an issue that has to be addressed? And this is how we would do it as a community.
Yes.
Perhaps I can understand.
Can you just introduce yourself?
Sorry. Sophia Furi, 25 years ago. Then can you please correct me if I misunderstood? If this is the only thing that we're deciding on in this town meeting, then didn't you say earlier that the school committee will come up with one proposal, and then we would have to vote on that one proposal if it is a go or no?
So this.
Next spring, not this year.
No.
No, so this spring, what's to be decided is, are we going to agree to fund the feasibility study? And if we secure that funding this May, then we start a feasibility study, which is a 30-month process, where we look at all the possible options. It's like a funnel. Here are all the possible options, and then we're going to whittle it down, and we're going to come up with a preferred option and have a schematic design. And then it's at that moment, when that whole process has happened, then the community would say, and now are we going to fund that? That's sort of like the big ask, right? Where we really decide to invest the money in a construction project.
Okay. We are saying the same thing then.
Okay,
the school
good.
committee will decide which is the preferred option that they will put up for a vote.
Yeah.
So the feasibility study will be done, then the committee will evaluate it and come up with the committee's preferred option to put up for a vote.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
So if we do the feasibility, if that gets approved at the town meeting and everyone's okay with doing the feasibility, are we guaranteed money from Massachusetts?
I asked that very same question of the MSBA, and so they're clear. The reason that they have these phases is because their board votes at the end of each phase to move you into the next phase, right? So I said that very thing to them. How, is it a lot? Like, how often does a community get to the end of the eligibility phase, move into the feasibility study, and then not get the reimbursement? And they said from their perspective, that doesn't happen. The question is whether or not the community votes to secure the funding to go into the feasibility stage, and if the community votes to fund the construction project. So once they've invited you in, they are not interested in backing out.
So it's never happened.
I don't know if they said never, but they
Can
said
you ask?
virtually never. So the only thing that could happen, I will ask again, but each of these phases is prescribed and they have deliverables. So for instance, the eligibility phase that we're in now, the big one is to get the funding for the feasibility study, but there's also this educational plan that we have to submit. I mean, we're not planning to blow it and not submit that report, right? We're going to do that. But if for some reason the town or the school department fails to follow through on the commitments, yeah, you could be.
And will we know when we get your final decision on, well, if we go through feasibility and then we come up with a school plan and you guys decide on the plan and we have that vote in 3 years from now?
Yeah.
Will we know we're going to get money from Massachusetts before we make that vote?
Yes, and they will be able to tell you what the rate is. So I live in Natick, and we are voting on that very question next week to build a new middle school, and they've told us 34% reimbursement on the cost of this project going forward.
You signed a contract.
You signed a contract.
Right, I just want to make sure we have a true idea of how much we're going to end up paying the town versus
Yes.
Oh, sure.
I'm voting yes on the Natick.
Yeah.
In case anybody- So it's not, but I don't want you to think we're not thinking of the middle school. So when we assessed our capital needs across the district, we do know that there are needs at the middle school, but we think that the elementary needs are more pressing than that. The middle school building, though it is old, it actually was just, it was built better than this building. Like this building is a wood frame.
Yeah,
A wood frame building. So the middle school is just a more solidly built building. And so that will be a community discussion probably like 15 years out. Of the school.
Thank you. There's a question over here on this side. Did you have a question?
I was wondering about taxes. Is it, my thinking is, if you build the buildings, or will we be impacted by a rise in our taxes at some point, and where will we consider that?
Yeah.
And I'm not sure we will be impacted by a rise in taxes, but when I go out and talk to the community, some of us children have graduated from the school system already, and we want to stay in town. And we kind of, I don't want my taxes to go up.
Yes.
It's kind of like, how do I address that amongst, if I'm trying to go out to get support?
Nobody wants their taxes to go up. I hear that. Let me just say that your taxes are not going to go up because you vote to do the feasibility study. So that, the town is going to fund that within its debt service. And I mean, I don't want to downplay that $1.75 million is a lot of money, but in the grand scheme of things, over 20 years, that's not, and if we get reimbursement and it gets rolled into the project. So I don't think people are going to feel an impact to the vote this spring. That's my honest assessment. When it comes time to fund a big building construction project, I mean, I don't think that's going to happen within 2.5, right? And so that probably does involve an override vote. I mean, it's a big decision for a community to make that kind of investment.
A debt exclusion.
A debt exclusion, yes, debt exclusion. So there is some good news. So we're only a couple of years off from paying off the high school debt. And so that's one interesting fact, is that the debt is going to fall off on the high school in 2023. Did I make that up? I think, but I don't want, well, I'm being recorded, so I probably will be quoted, but I think we're a couple of years away from paying off the high school building. So there's an example of, that is something that currently we're financing, and then when we're relieved of that debt, that might provide some mitigation, right, in terms of how people feel the impact of taking on some other piece of debt. I don't want to suggest that it's going to be neutral. I don't think that's going to be nothing. And that's because of the way that the debt was structured for the high school building. It's different than the way MSBA structures it now. And so the rate at which we were paying it off
It's front-loaded.
Was front-loaded on the high school. So we're not paying as much now as we were at the beginning, if that makes sense. But that's the kind of information that we will need to get out there and educate people about down the line when it's time to really think about funding the project itself.
The other thing is, I think we're continuing to receive more funding from the University Station project.
Mm-hmm.
So that's helped us, right, to keep some of our taxes.
Yeah, that's absolutely helped us. I mean, we've realized, I was at a presentation a couple weeks ago where Pam Dugan was talking about that it's about $5 million a year in tax revenue now that we have, that we did not have before University Station. And so while I don't think people are experiencing their taxes as going down, I don't know, that isn't happening, that revenue has offset what the increase might have been without that project.
Yes.
Jim Doyle again. To put things into perspective, being an educator all my life, my kids are in their 40s. I'm remembering vaguely that maybe cost per student was probably $10,000 to make the calculations easy. And you got 13 years of education, that's $130,000 a kid. I had 2 children, that's $260,000. My taxes are approaching $10,000 now. Half of that goes to the town, the other half goes to the schools. So I'm paying $5,000 a year on a $260,000 debt. I'll never pay it. So you put that into perspective, what it costs for your education. If you send a kid to private private school, it'll cost you even more, but you gotta pay it right off the bat. Excuse me. So anyway, keep that in perspective, and that way you can see
Great
what this
perspective.
budget's gonna cost in nickels and dimes instead of something.
Let me get Mr. Fileo on the
Yeah.
spot.
Yes, we're putting you out there, Jim.
I'm not running for office.
We don't need you to run for office, we just need you to be an ambassador. I think we're going to put that on your jacket. That's great, thank you. Anyone else? Going once, going twice.
Maya Plotkin, 165 Clapper Tree. You had mentioned that the MSBA is going to require a building commission, and that the selectman is going to be on our building committee, a selectman, someone from the building department. Is there any opportunity for one or two members of the community at large to be a part of that?
Yes, absolutely.
And how would that be decided? Is it just people would apply, or?
It's a good question. I don't know that we've talked about the specifics of that.
We haven't come up with specifics, but typically in the past when I can only compare to, say, when we're hiring a superintendent, we solicit the community and people apply. And we review the applications almost like a job.
Okay.
So that's really the process. No rush, anything else? No? Okay, so with that, thank you all for coming out. We're going to make a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second? You second that? Okay. We're all in favor, and we are adjourning. Thanks again.
Yeah.